Hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Lindy's Magpie Reads. If you're new here, special welcome to you. I'm Lindy. I talk about books. I read a lot. So if you want to hear about Canadian books, you are definitely in the right place. Today I have an all-Canadian episode, 7 Canadian authors, books that I finished recently to tell you about. 6 of these are nonfiction. 1 is a novel. 2 of them are kind of poetry hybrids. 2 of them are by Indigenous authors and 2 are by Chinese Canadian authors. I've got graphic nonfiction, I've got an audiobook, so yeah, there's quite an assortment. But before I get to the books, I want to talk about cooking. I have been having fun in the kitchen lately. So for example, I've been working my way through this Persian cookbook. I might include more about the cookbook at the very end of this video. We'll see. But one of the things that I made is fruit chutney. It has a whole long list of ingredients, including 1 orange. And my partner Lori was going out. She said, "Can I get you anything while I'm running errands?" I said, "Yes, please, 1 orange." And she came back with the biggest orange I've ever seen. I seriously, it was the size of a softball. I should have taken a photo, but I looked at the receipt and I saw that this 1 orange cost $2.50, and there was no way that I was going to waste any of it. So besides using the inside part, which was for the recipe, I also used the peel and I candied it. So when you make candied peel, you also get orange syrup, and I've been using that to flavor yogurt and to add a little bit of interest to club soda to make a special drink, you know, that kind of thing. So there's been that. And this is the time of year that we celebrate Lori's birthday. So we had friends over and I made a special meal, including dishes that were in this Persian cookbook. And Lori made a special request. The cake that she wanted is an oatmeal cake with a broiled coconut topping. This is a classic comfort food. Let me know in the comments down below if you are a fan of oatmeal cake and or with the broiled topping. All right, on to the books. Starting with the audiobook. I'm mostly here to enjoy myself. One Woman's Pursuit of Pleasure in Paris by Glynnis MacNicol. And the audiobook is read by the author. Now, I picked this up on the recommendation of the booktuber Marilyn Maya Mendoza, who's become a good friend of mine, and she loved this. Glynnis MacNicol is a bisexual Canadian freelance writer who makes her home in New York City, and every year for a long time she has been going to Paris for the month of August. And then because she is single, during the COVID lockdowns in New York, she spent 16 months pretty much isolated in her tiny apartment and just jumped at the chance to use somebody's apartment in Paris. So this was in August of 2021. She has a network of friends there in Paris, and one of the things that this memoir focuses on is her desire to be touched. So she signed on to some dating apps and talked about her adventures with that. Also, she talked about how the friendship with these other women was often more important to her than hooking up. I liked her writing style very much. So here are some quotes. All dating apps are ridiculous by and large. There's no arguing with that. But I shrug off the concern. So this is the concern of one of her friends. One of the unexpected realizations to come out of my 40s is that being human is largely ridiculous. So she turns 47 on this trip. And I really liked what she had to say about narrative structure. So she talks about her writing within the memoir, which is pretty cool. She says, I think a lot about narrative structure. I suppose this is what happens when enough people tell you your story is not worthy of one. I have a theory about how we understand narrative. I've come to wonder whether our adherence to the 3-act structure, setup, confrontation, resolution, is simply based on the male orgasm. No, really, think about it. Tension, execution, release, the end. This makes sense. Men have written most of our history. The notion that women should experience pleasure in sex is a relatively new one in Western culture. There's no question plenty of women did, just that they were not expected to. And then later on she says, what would a story arc based on the female orgasm look like? Like waves, I imagine. Some bigger and more significant than others, some smaller and gentler, in no particular order. The narrative of pleasure for women is often a solo one. The inciting incident, a hand taken to oneself. The tension, the release. But then, if you know your own body well enough, understand what you like and what you want, more again, to be enjoyed or endured with the knowledge that everything ends and also that everything begins. Perhaps the inciting incident is just that you liked it and wanted more. And this kind of leads me to the cover painting, the image on the cover. It's one that she describes looking at in the Louvre. It's called L'Odalisque by François Boucher, and it was painted in 1745, and that is his wife that's in the image. Lots of things to think about in this memoir. My next book is one that is written for middle grade and up. It's nonfiction, Lost at Windy River, a true story of survival. So this is by Trina Rathgeber, who wrote the story, and the art is by Alina, and it's colored by Jillian Dolan, and all 3 of these creators are of Nehiyaw ancestry. So the story is about Ilsa, who, when she was 13 years old in 1944, became lost in the Northern Barrens of Canada. So she was lost there for 9 days without food or supplies. And Farley Mowat included her story in his book, The People of the Deer, that came out in 1952, I think. That's described at the beginning here, where Ilsa, who had always been irked that this had happened, that she didn't get to tell her own story. It was her story to tell. Here's a picture of Ilsa with her grandson. And Trina, who tells the story, is Ilsa's granddaughter. Trina's a member of the Peter Ballantine Reserve, and she grew up in Thompson, Manitoba. So obviously, Ilsa survived her ordeal, but it is a gripping story of adventure. And at one point, once she gets home, she is so badly frostbitten that she has to go to the hospital, and her father takes her to the closest place, which is Brochet. And Brochet is the place where Thompson Highway, the author and musician, was born, although after this event, I think he was born in 1951. So it's just interesting to see these connections between the lives of real people. So, gripping true story of survival. And another middle grade to YA nonfiction. This one is a memoir, Uprooted, a memoir about what happens when your family moves back. It's by Ruth Chan. She is an illustrator who is Canadian, but based in New York City, like Glynnis MacNicol. So this documents the events of 1993. And once again, it's about a 13-year-old. So Ruth was 13 when her family decided to leave Toronto and move back to Hong Kong. Ruth had only known Toronto. Her Cantonese was not strong, even though her parents always spoke it at home, but she and her brother usually replied to them in English. So she was a real fish out of water once she got to Hong Kong, and pretty unhappy about leaving her friends behind. However, she had a lot of extended family members there. Her mother was so happy to be back in Hong Kong. And there are some sections in here that I felt verklempt. Yes, very touching scenes, and so much that's relatable. You know, that it's that story about how the struggle to put down roots, to feel at home, and the realization that home is where your family is. There's also a second storyline running through it, which is the story of Ruth's father. And her father was born when his family was on the run. So it was during the Second Sino-Japanese War. Quite a difficult adventure. Adventure is not the right word. Experience for his family, you know, as they were living through a time of war and fleeing. And I do very much recommend Uprooted. And next, I have a collection of poetry and essays by Jillian C. It's called Quiet Night Think. Jillian C. grew up in Winnipeg. Her parents had immigrated there from China. They are Hokkien speakers. And once again, part of this story is about finding the place where you belong, thinking about family origins, thinking about her Chinese culture. So the title comes from a very famous Chinese poem. And this book won the Pat Lowther Memorial Award. So I flagged lots of passages that really struck a chord with me. Her writing is gorgeous. Here's just a little sample from the poem titled Prayer. When panicked, grant me the unshakable calm of flowers. And there's one place where the poems go across the page this way. She quotes writers that I am familiar with, like Jeanette Winterson and Louise Gluck and Maggie Nelson. So I felt like I could make lots of connections as I was reading this. And she also talks about ekphrasis poetry. So a different collection of hers, which I'm definitely going to pick up. It's called Fish Bones. And she says before composing each poem, she would look at a given artwork for 1 full hour. One of the things that she wonders is, you know, when we spend a lot of time looking at an object, what emerges? And this is an idea that came up during the Framed in September booktube reading event that I participated in along with a whole bunch of other booktubers. And I have been quite fascinated by ekphrasis for a long time. She says, ekphrasis is not only to compose a text inspired by the artwork itself, but also to be carried off by the uncontainable surge of memory and affect, judgment and speculation. It is to dive under eyes first. You know, the reason that this book came to my attention is also because of BookTube. The Best Canadian Books of the 21st Century project that I did with Jillian, a bookworm adventure girl. It brought up so many titles that I'd never heard of before. This was somebody's top Canadian book of the 21st century. It didn't make the top 67. It was in the long tail of, you know, more than 350 books in all that were mentioned by people who submitted to the project. But thank you to whoever submitted this book, because I am really glad to have not just this book, but this author brought to my attention. Definitely going to be picking up Fish Bones and probably other books that she's written as well. And here's another book that has poetry together with something else. It's called The Dialogues, The Song of Francis Pegahmagabow, and it's by Armand, Garnet, Ruffo, who is an Anishnaabe poet and storyteller. So this came about because, this book came about because of a project to create an opera biography of Francis Pegahmagabow, who was the most decorated Indigenous soldier in Canadian history. I actually talked about him when I talked about the graphic novel This Place, 150 Years Retold, because David A. Robertson wrote one of the stories in there about Francis Pegahmagabow. So Ruffo wrote the libretto for the opera that was composed by Tim Corliss, and you can find out more about that musical production online. So I am going to link down below to Sounding Thunder, which is another name that Francis Pegahmagabow used. There's a lot of Anishnaabe Moen, the Anishnaabe language, in here with translations. I'm going to read you just a little bit about that. Translations can never be exact. In her novel, Fugitive Pieces, a book mired in war, Anne Michaels writes that reading a poem in translation is like kissing a woman through a veil. You never quite get it. She refers to the difficulty of translating Greek poetry. What about Anishnaabe Moen? Linguists consider it one of the most complex languages on the planet. 6,000 verb forms, a reflection of a people's reality. So sometimes there'll be Anishnaabe Moen on one side of the page, the English translation on the other, and an attempt to get the correct English word when, as you probably know, there's often times when there is no exact word from one language translated to another. The song of Francis Pegahmagabow, or this story, is divided into 3 parts. So we have his early life, growing up with an adopted grandfather who taught him the old ways. Then there's the middle section is when he's in World War I in the trenches, and I think he's there for most of 4 years. It's horrific, as you could imagine, and the way that he is treated. He's awarded multiple medals, and then the third part is once he comes home from the war and is not treated in the same way that other white veterans are treated. Heartbreaking again, and yet all of the great things that he accomplished. So an amazing, amazing, amazing story. I loved this, loved it. Okay, here's the one novel that I've got to tell you about, Code Noir, Metamorphoses by Canisia Lubrin, who is a poet. This is her first novel. And look at all my flags. It's my second go around with this. The first time that I attempted, I got 40% of the way into it. That was back in March, and I felt like too much was just going over my head. Thankfully, with this reading of it, I have the company, the buddy read of Jillian, a bookworm adventure girl. And I can't tell you how helpful it is when you're reading something that's difficult to have somebody to kind of talk things out along the way. One of the things that Jillian talked about was seeing Canisia Lubrin have a conversation with Tanya Talaga on stage at WordFest in Calgary. And they talked about how much their respective books had in conversation with each other. So Tanya Talaga's book, The Knowing, has to do with residential school systems that Indigenous children had to attend for over 100 years, and the difficulty of contemporary people being able to trace their loved ones who were lost, who died at those schools. And there were many, many deaths. There were unmarked graves, and records were not carefully kept, hardly kept at all in some cases. And there's a little bit of that in here too, because Code Noir refers to the edicts issued by King Louis XIV of France in the 1600s, and there are rules about slavery within the French Empire. And these rules still affect the lives of descendants of enslaved people today, and the attitudes and policies that still exist today in North America and in the Caribbean. Canisia Lubrin is from the island of St. Lucia, which is in the Windward Islands in the Caribbean, and a number of the stories in here are set there. Some are set in Canada, some are set in the US. There's reference to Côte d'Ivoire in Africa and to Saudi Arabia. So there's a diaspora. Each one of the stories, I think there are 59 of them that correspond to the number of edicts in the Code Noir. But each one is told in a different style. So there's a whole bunch of different writing styles. Lubrin's poetic sense and facility with language just wows me. So even if I'm having trouble making head or tail of a story, I'm still appreciative and amazed at the language use. So there's that. So there's still a lot I feel like went over my head, and yet there's a lot that I got out of it. So this is one for rereading. I have the audiobook on reserve at the library, but there's quite a waiting list. And Jolene assures me that the audiobook is a really good production with multiple voices. And I also want to mention another aspect of this book is that there's artwork in it by Torkwasi Dyson in between each of the stories. And these stories are brief, and within the artwork are it's the text of these codes from Code Noir. And these codes tie in to the stories. Sometimes the story following, sometimes the code refer before the story and after the story. Both are applicable. Some of these stories I felt like I really connected with. Others, as I think I mentioned, have kind of left me scratching my head. But a puzzle is good. And I feel like, yes, there's going to be much more that I can glean from this book, and that other readers who have different experiences will be getting different things out of these. I can call them interconnected stories, I guess. There's often small connections that you can immediately see between stories where the same character appears in different stories. But the overall themes of sorrow and grief and loss and trying to track down ancestors where records have not been kept, and the viewpoint of spirits and ghosts. There are dogs throughout. There are mentions of little gods with broken noses, and sometimes, well, one time even, the word God is a slip of the tongue when she meant to say dog. Stray gods? No, stray dogs. And I can only tell you that the reading experience is unlike anything I have experienced before. And if that appeals to you, then I highly, highly recommend this. And you probably will be hearing more about it if you follow my channel, and also if you follow Jolene, Bookworm Adventure Girl. And why aren't you if you're not? Her channel is great, and she features a lot of Canadian fiction over there too. So one thing that Canisia Lubrin's book prompted me to do is to pick up People Love Dead Jews by Dara Horn. I read this, I think, a couple of years ago, and there's one chapter in here that talks about narrative structure within the Jewish literary tradition and how different it is from Western, and in particular English literary structure. So I am revisiting that because narrative structure is definitely on my mind these days. And it's not just me. That first audiobook that I talked about, I'm mostly here to enjoy myself. Glynnis MacNicol is talking about narrative structure there as well. So on to the final book that I have to tell you about, and this is definitely my favorite of the bunch. The Age of Insecurity, Coming Together as Things Fall Apart, and it's by Astra Taylor. It has taken me about 7 weeks to get through this. I had probably as many flags as I had in Canisia Lubrin's book, but I have transcribed them into my notebook. There's about 15 or 16 pages of writing in there, and I am also going to be listening to this because this is part of the CBC Massey Lectures series, and that has been going on every year since 1961 and being broadcast on CBC radio as a 5-part series. So it's available online. I'm going to link it down below. And yeah, I will definitely be listening to it. So much food for thought in here. What Astra Taylor is writing about, obviously, insecurity, she is showing how our economic system depends on manufacturing insecurity to create more pliable workers and insatiable consumers. And she also has a vision for changing that and ways that we can live in a better way. Our social systems are made by people and we can change them. And I found that so encouraging. But there was so many aspects of this book that are like basic history things that I felt like I missed out on, or that I hadn't put the pieces together in the way that she does. This book, by the way, was a finalist for the Governor General Awards this year. The book that won was Nehiyaw Sinclair's Winnipeg, and something that he talks about in that book, the Bear Clan Patrol in Winnipeg, looking after people who are on the streets and making sure that they're safe. She refers to that in here in this book. So many ties to other writers, famous thinkers, both from the past and from present day. There's an extensive bibliography and notes section at the back. I feel like I just want to read and read and read from it, but I'm going to let you discover it on your own, except for this little part. Today, many people respond to insecurity by donning masks of superiority and invincibility. They denounce snowflakes who need safe spaces, while taking shelter behind bigotry, clinging to a center that oppresses the periphery. An ethic of insecurity seeks to mitigate this tendency, knowing that history shows that more materially secure and egalitarian conditions make people less reactive and more tolerant. When we shrink the welfare state because we expect the worst from people, we end up hurting ourselves and those we care about, creating a vicious cycle that stokes desperation and division. When we extend trust and support to others, we improve everyone's security, moving from a culture of fear and scarcity toward one of abundance, generosity, and stability. So there's a social critique in here and history, and there's also a memoir. Astra Taylor grew up in Winnipeg, and she was unschooled, and that term is explained in here. It's different from being homeschooled. And her experience with that I found very interesting, and how it's affected her views today. She lives in New York City. So once again, a Canadian who's made her home in New York. And she's also an activist, a longtime member of a group called the Debt Collective, working to improve people's lives because crushing debt can be something as small as $250 if you are living in poverty. All of the stuff about debt, maybe I have to read something else about debt. So this is somewhat condensed. In 2013, the year before police killed 18-year-old Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri officials had issued over 33,000 arrest warrants for a city of just over 21,000 people. Many of these warrants were issued because people could not pay their municipal fines and fees, often charges for trivial offenses like a broken tail light or leaving a trash can on the street. Failure to pay could lead to jail. And she talks about how across North America, poverty has been criminalized. One recent study of municipal records in Montreal found that unhoused people receive 40% of all tickets for bylaw infractions, though they make up less than 1% of the city's total population. The penalty for sleeping on a park bench, for example, can be $100. The number of tickets being issued is rising exponentially with devastating consequences. A volunteer at a Montreal legal clinic has assisted unhoused individuals with debts ranging from hundreds to tens of thousands of dollars, all incurred as a result of living on the streets. One man owed the city $40,000, a balance that ballooned while he was unhoused during the COVID pandemic. Just so much injustice and great ideas about what to do instead. Like the Universal Basic Income Project. I loved reading about that. So many other inspired, creative solutions. I cannot recommend this highly enough. The Age of Insecurity. And that is all I've got for you today. So thank you so very much for watching. I always appreciate hearing from you. So please do say hello in the comments down below. Let me know if you're interested in reading any of these or if you have read any of these, if you have comments on what I've said so far. Stick around if you want to see more about that Persian cookbook, which is gorgeous and very fat. So, in the meantime, happy reading, everybody. I'll see you all again soon. Bye for now. So this is the second time that I've borrowed this cookbook from my friend Drew. He's been away for a month, so he didn't have any need of it, but they'll be coming home tomorrow, so I want to show you some of the things that I made in Food of Life, Ancient Persian and Modern Iranian Cooking and Ceremonies. It's by Nehiyaw Batmangli. So this is so pretty. Just flip through to some of these pages that I've marked. I made the yogurt, cucumber, and rose petal dip a couple of times. And I also made the yogurt and spinach dip a couple of times. So good. And I'm going to do this yogurt and cooked beet dip today. Okay, the oven-baked rice. Wow. Okay, well, I'll start with saying that the recipe calls for
chicken thighs or leg of lamb, but there is a vegetarian variation which simply says, eliminate the chicken. Now, it's not as simple as that. When you have a recipe that has a bunch of chicken or lamb in it, because that ingredient adds savory elements, umami, fat, various things. So, and you're also going to have to adjust the salt and seasoning. However, I really wanted to try this because it's one that's baked with this crispy rice crust. And so I made it with a layer of cooked giant beans, and then followed the recipe for a layer of dried barberries. There's a layer of cooked onions, and the recipe has orange zest in it and saffron, and it was delicious. Oh, it was just so good. I also made a vegetarian version of this carrot and plum koresh, which is a kind of stew. This fruit chutney, look at this long list of ingredients. Dried apricots, dried tart cherries, dried pitted prunes. It's got apple and quinces. Now, I didn't find any quince, so I used Asian pear instead. It's got persimmons, red pepper, an orange, some garlic, dried mangoes. Actually, I didn't have that. I substituted more dried apricots. It's got cider vinegar, tamarind paste. I actually used pomegranate molasses instead. And I also didn't have date molasses, but I did have a lot of dates. So I made my own date molasses. And then look at these spices: cumin, golpar, black pepper, turmeric, coriander seed, cinnamon, ginger, cardamom, Persian lime powder, and saffron, and nigella. It made it such a delicious chutney. I'm really happy with the results. I tried one of these teas. Oh, the rose petal tea that's got a clove and cardamom, a tablespoon of dried rose petals. Yeah, that was quite good. And I made advia according to this recipe with ground dried rose petals, cinnamon, cardamom, and cumin. And I've been using it a lot in all kinds of things. So those are just a few of the recipes that I've tried in this book, in case you're interested.